last session of the day. I hope you enjoyed the first two, and if you attended yesterday, those as well. It's been a great event so far. We're almost sold out of seats, so if you know of anybody else that wants to attend this event live, please let them know. Uh, More than likely, by the time Friday comes around, it's the event is probably not going to be open for any new registrations. So um, let folks know. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Toddi Norum, who has been an incredible supporter of TLDC for years now. I think maybe 2016,
Six,
2017,
yeah, 16
2016.
actually. Yep.
So yeah, Toddy has been helping us forever. And let me read you a quick bio. Toddy Norum has over 15 years of experience in learning and development with a background in technical writing and a focus on the armed services, robotics, and remote technologies. She excels in learning technologies and LMS systems, but prefers content development. Currently, she consults for a medical device company and a state health agency. Living in southern New Hampshire with her spouse and six dogs, Toddy also fosters dogs, and she's pursuing a master's in community development at the University of New Hampshire, aiming to launch a nonprofit for training equity. Her latest documentary film has won 5 film festival awards in 2024, which I probably don't should know more about, but don't. So at some
We
point,
actually just hit 9, and we're going to New York to accept one. So very cool.
that's amazing. Congrats. All right. So
Thank you.
today, Toddy's going to be talking about workplace disability accommodation. Toddy, thanks again for being a part of a TLDC event. And I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take over.
Okay, sounds good. So, hey everybody, thank you for joining. I really, really appreciate you being here. What I want to talk about is accommodation request, which is different from what we've been doing in the rest of the conference. I have to tell you, the content that I've been seeing so far is excellent, and I learned so much from everybody that jumps on here. And in fact, I was going through my own slide deck here this week and thinking, okay, I need to fix this because it's not exactly accessible. So I have not pushed this through a screen reader yet, but I've actually noticed when I mouse over things, I got some of my alt text right, so that's good. Learned some things about how to set things up for making sure they're in the right order for readers and all that good stuff. So like there's just so much that comes away from this conference that's usable like right away. So the reason I'm presenting this is because most of us in this group, I think, are extremely empathetic to folks who come in with disabilities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut. But I think that part of that has to do with the fact that, either those of us come in here with something of our own that we deal with, or we have family members. And I think just as a group, honestly, trainers, I think, are very empathetic people. So what I wanted to cover, and I am not an authority on this, I'll put a disclaimer out that right away, is how to request an accommodation, which is not that big of a deal, but there are some definite glitches in this, and I've actually done it 3 times, 3 times in 3 different workplaces, and had 3 very different experiences. That wanted to chat with you guys a little bit about, my experiences and what you should be doing, what you should be thinking about. And I've got a deck. I hope you guys can see the deck. I put it into PDF because PDF is the better format for AirMeet. And I ended up with a comic, which kind of perfectly summarizes one of my experiences, which was bigger is not necessarily more accessible. Because I literally had a company that did this exact thing to me, and no joke, I think the monitor was like so big I couldn't look up to see the top part of it without getting a neck ache. So bigger does not necessarily mean more accessible. So let's jump into this real quick. Some disclaimers right off the bat. And if you guys, I hope you can read this. If you have any trouble with this, I've got a link and I can send it out to you. I've got it on a Google link so I can share it to you. There's some resources on here, so that way you guys will have a quick access to the resources I'm citing here. These guidelines come from my experience. And yes, that oversized monitor was part of my experience. I have had actually, so just because this is kind of a closed group, I've had MS for 30 years. So, it's a big deal, but I've been very successful with it. But I do actually have 3 different eye conditions. A couple of those are related to MS and a couple are not. but they have caused some issues with me with doing my work. I have a hearing disability. I wear hearing aids. Right now, those work really, really well, but you never know. That could get worse too. I have a food allergy, which nobody cares about, and I'm sure that a lot of you have had that experience as well. And with MS, I get extreme fatigue, especially in the summer heat like this. And then I also have neuromuscular issues where I get quite a bit of pain in my legs and in my hips. So, like couple that with a drive, couple that with poor ergonomics, couple that with, like really poor setups. I remember having to beg for a stand up desk at one point. These are the things that I've had issues with, and many people have similar issues, many don't. And it's amazing how organizations tend to treat things all the same. So, really fascinating. Despite 30 years of all of this, I have actually been really successful in what I do. And I find that typically I have a hard time staying unemployed. I actually tried that for a couple months this year. I took some time off to be with family, and it's amazing. I just keep getting these requests to come in and consult, which is cool. But I have been pretty successful, and I've definitely been a valued employee. And that's what we all want to be. I mean, we all come in and we're all typically qualified for the work that we want to do, and we want to be a valued employee. And sometimes we just need a little help to do that with the things that we bring to the table. So I've got some links in here for Americans with Disabilities Act. So there's a couple different links, and I'll point them out to you guys. But as we go along, and let me scroll down, get right here. More disclaimers. This is not legal advice. I'm definitely not an attorney, and so no one go say, "Hey, Toddi said." But the thing that you should know your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So keeping that in mind, I know we have people coming from outside the U.S. So the things that I'm telling you are very specific to the U.S. They're not, they don't include other countries because I don't know how other countries handle this. But just throwing that out there is my disclaimer. The other thing too is also really understand your organization's guidelines, because most grown-up organizations will have a policy in place as far as workplace accommodation and how to go about asking for one. So I did have a poll up, and I don't know if it's still there. I actually got cut off and came back in, but I'm curious how many people have actually tried to get a workplace accommodation, and actually how many of you have been successful at getting one and getting what you feel like you need. It would be really interesting to hear that in chat. So, yeah, I saw Nancy, you said would love the link. I definitely will put that in there for you. I won't forget. I may do that here in a little bit here and let you know how that goes. But the link should go, I open it up. So it'll be from my drive, and you should be able to grab it, and you'll be able to grab the slide deck that I have right here. So moving on, find out about your organization's process. First of all, that's one of the most important things you can do for yourself is understand how to go about it, whether it's a form, whether it's a formal process, whether it's talking to your manager. I actually recently, in one of my accommodation requests, discovered that the company I was working with actually did not handle accommodation requests. They farmed it out to a third party. So that was something that wasn't actually not known to me until I got to that process. It was probably the most impersonal process I've ever been through, but different from the other things that I've done in the past. But before you go into this, you have to really think about what are you asking for? Like, what do you need? What do you need to do your job well? Think about it from a performance standpoint. If you're going to do your job well and you're well qualified to do it, what do you need? Is that going to be readers? Is that going to be accessible content? Do you need versions of the software that have different features? Do you need a different desk? Do you need a ramp? Do you need closer parking? Do you need, like there's all kinds of, but think about what you need and what you need to make yourself really successful in your job. And write them out, write those things out, make sure you understand what you think you're going to ask for. And then be sure and justify your request by directly linking it to your performance. Like there's all kinds of nice to haves in the workplace, but there are the things that we definitely need to have when we have a need for accommodation that we can link to our performance. And one of those might be a stand-up desk if you have fatigue. It might be a place to put your feet. Who knows? It might actually be temperature control, might be lighting. I mean, I've had to ask for a lot of these things. Um, so Molly, oh my gosh, she's so funny. She's correct. She's got a big monitor that she's asking for. So, but think about it, write it out, literally write it out so that you can think about how you can perform your job. So when you write all this out, think about when you need it, like how quickly you need it, how long you're going to need it for. And I say this because sometimes you might need an accommodation for something that's an exacerbation of your condition. And then maybe that's going to go away in 6 months. Maybe you need to be working from home because it's not good for you to be working on site and driving, but that won't be forever, right? Okay. So maybe that's something where you need to say, this is the accommodation I need, and then put a time frame around it. So, and then also understand going into this that it really should be an interactive discussion that you have with your management. Um, and I will tell you that I've had people say before, accommodation is the law and your employer is required to abide by it. Yeah, yes and no. So I'm just going to put that out there to you, but know that if you can have this as a discussion, you're going to be more successful. So also know going in that you might have to provide medical documentation. And that can be really uncomfortable for many of us to have our medical history going out to someone that we work for or to HR or to, in my last case, to a third party organization that made the decision on behalf of the organization, which is kind of weird. Um, but also know that they only have access to what they need, and it has to pertain directly to your case. They can't ask for anything else. And if you need to go to an individual physician and say, hey, I'm going to grant permission for my organization to have conversations with you about this, then you might have to sign some forms. You may have to sign release forms as well. So, I mean, there's a number of things. Yeah, so, and Kayleen says this, from my understanding, medical documentation only needs to say what accommodations you need. And that you don't have to list your diagnoses. And I don't know whether or not that's true. And I'm going to guess that Kayleen probably knows more than I do. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but definitely know that it has its limits, right? So, if you've got things that you're not real keen about somebody seeing in your medical history, make sure that you are very clear when you go to your doctor's office that they are only to be giving out information that pertains specifically to your case in the accommodation. Kaylee said she's not an expert either, but that's the advice she's seen. So, and that's, again, go back to the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a couple other links that I have in here too that might be helpful. So make sure that you just really understand what you're asking for. Write it out. And in your accommodation request, write it out, be specific. And know that you're definitely going to have a good negotiation going in, and you'll be talking to management and working with them directly. One other thing I'm going to add here is that your request could be denied if it creates a situation where there is an unreasonable burden to the company, and that can have to do with cost. It could, be a financial issue if it's a small company. It could have to, maybe there's a need for someone to build something new for you, and there's not an ability within a building to do something specific. So there's many different reasons that it could be denied. Most companies try to do the best they can. Most organizations do the best they can. So, but it could get denied because of what they call unreasonable burden. So, yeah, actually, and so Nancy says there could be some additional state legislation and not just the federal ADA laws that apply. And that's a really relevant point because even in my state, in New Hampshire, there are relevant laws that apply that actually didn't apply in the state where I was working, which was in Massachusetts. So I'm right on the border. So it's like, it's a weird situation, but there are other state laws. So get yourself smart on like your state laws with respect to ADA. Get yourself smart with respect to federal laws, and make sure that you tie your ask directly to what you need for your work to be good. Basically, that's where it is. The additional thing is know that discrimination and retaliation are very distinctly prohibited if you request an accommodation, but there are weird things that happen behind the scenes, and some things are very hard to prove. And I will say that from experience because I've actually had a legal case regarding accommodation, and let's just say that it made my world of work very difficult. So let me move on here. So from a legal perspective, okay, and so these are some things that you need to understand when accommodations need to be considered. Okay, so this is when they need to be considered by the workplace or the work organization. This doesn't have to do with when accommodations need to be considered with respect to customers. That's a different case. This is for employees. And so the law is actually pretty specific about it. It needs to be there to ensure equal opportunity for the application process. Okay, so that's the way it reads in the law. Accommodation needs to be considered to create an equal situation for a qualified individual, okay, and note that, I've highlighted this, with a disability to perform the essential functions of the job. So again, it needs to be there for a qualified individual. And so if someone is actually technically not qualified for a role, but asking for accommodation for something that is outside of the role that they're qualified, there could be an issue there. Additionally, it needs to be made possible for the employee to enjoy the same full equal benefits as other people in that business or on the team and the privileges of employment. And so, I worked with an organization that had like free lunch in the cafeteria. So that was one of the benefits. I mean, whether that's a benefit or not is always kind of a question, but that was a benefit. So, in that case, that needed to be accessible for someone with a disability. So, those are things that pertain in this particular law as well. I'm just reading here. Molly says, given that the company has its own medical doctor, you can provide and sign a medical release from doctor to doctor, which is actually true. That's where that third party can come in. The third party typically is paid for by the company to help them make the decision about the accommodation, and they do have their own set of doctors, and then you sign the medical release, and so the doctors can talk to each other and then agree on what accommodations that they should be able to provide. I will say, in the case where I had to deal with the third party, I felt like that was taken away from me, where my desire for an accommodation got removed from me and talked about between experts, and I got left out of that. And it really did feel that way to me. I don't know if that was just me being sensitive to it, but it was a different type of discussion regarding accommodation when there was a third party involved than when I was able to go directly to my management and say, okay, based on what I'm dealing with, this is what I need. So yeah, Nancy says I should have been included. Trust me, it was a weird experience. It was also a very large, very well-known company. So I hope that not a lot of other companies are going this way and removing themselves from the process, but for real, it really does happen. Let me pop in here. I'm going to put the next screen up. What reasonable accommodations might look like. So in the workplace, there's a number of ways that a person could be accommodated. They can be physical solutions. It could be like the desk. It could be the chair. It could be adjusting lighting, adjusting like comfort levels and heat or air conditioning. With MS, I mean, like most of us are very sensitive to changes in cold and heat. So I've actually had to have like temperature adjusted. I've had to have lighting adjusted for me for my eyes. The next is around accessible or assistive technologies, ensuring that your computer is accessible, your software is accessible, that your computer has the necessary adjustments on it. Like I have to have something that does not flicker. It has to have like a refresh rate that meets what I need. So there's just a lot of things that I have as specs on a monitor, which means that I typically need a more expensive monitor or something that's more eye friendly. That's kind of a tough ask, and sometimes because they have to go out and procure something like that individually instead of going to the closet in the back and pulling a standard monitor out. Providing screen reader software. I don't use screen reader software. I have recently started using it to test some things that I've been building. And I've been learning a lot more about how to use that. And certainly TLDC and the things that we do here have helped me understand better how folks use screen readers. I actually in the past have actually worked with somebody who was legally blind and used a screen reader so that I could understand better how they used it. That was well worth doing. Video phones to facilitate communications with colleagues who are deaf. I am not deaf. I have worked with someone who actually was deaf, and so we had accommodations made for that person in our meetings so that they could communicate with us. That's what these are the technologies that might be needed to make the work accessible to somebody with a disability. I've never had to request accessible communications. It's never been anything that I actually needed, although large print might not be a bad thing these days. Policy changes. I've had to request a policy change. I worked for a group that did not want anybody working from home. And the thing that I was requesting was to be able to work from home a couple days a week so that I wasn't having to drive because after there was a period of time where I had a lot of leg pain. So, that was not a doable thing for me. Adjusting work schedules, like so that you can go to medical visits. And I've had to do that in the past as well. And also, a company may need to modify its policy if you need a service animal. So, I've never used a service animal. I've got the 6 non-service animals at the house, so I don't know that I would be able to have a service animal in addition to the chaos here, but certainly always a thought. But I've worked in places where we've had service animals, and we've had to adjust policies for the folks that didn't have them. So, and this is a thing that I think is important to understand too, is that reasonable accommodations should not be viewed as special treatment for someone who makes the accommodation request. Because frankly, and I wish that more companies would think this way, things that we do to make the workplace more accommodating for folks with disabilities help out the rest of us. Because ramps are good. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can do. I mean, I worked with an organization that actually made it lighting adjustable above each workstation. So each person on their computer could go in and change settings for their lighting. And it wasn't just the people requesting accommodation that went in and made those changes. So it's very, very interesting. Renee says she's she's hearing impaired and having an issue. Renee, I'm just wondering. I don't know. Okay, I just took the closed captioning. I thought it was on, and it must have gone off before. So my apologies on that. I'm hoping that will help. Sometimes it's been an issue with my own speaker sets too, and hearing. And additionally, so I've had problems with my own voice in the last couple of years because I have a hiatal hernia that causes me to not be able to speak up because I get a lot of yuck in my throat. One of those minimum things, and one of those things that's pretty much ignored by the medical community. So let me work a little harder to speak up, and hopefully the closed captioning will help too. So, and I definitely will get the deck out to you as well because I'm covering most of the things in the deck. So I quickly summarize the things that you need to do when you request accommodation. One of the first things you need to do is notify your employer. So yeah, we already talked about identifying your needs, what you think you're going to ask for. Talking to your organization is your next step. That can sometimes be done informally. Sometimes it has to be written. Sometimes it has to be a set of forms. And that's where you really need to figure out what your workplace's policy is for that. But be sure and document everything as well. Keep copies of the things that you submit, know when you submitted them, have an idea of how long this is taking. If you've submitted everything and everything is in place and they've notified you, hey, we have it all, we're going to make a decision, or we're going to chat some more and offer some other suggestions, just make notes and keep track. Because I know in my last case, I actually had to call and nudge them and say, hey, where is this process? Like, where are we right now? Because I filed this 4 weeks ago, and I have the documentation that said I had filed it 4 weeks ago. So definitely keep track of it because it's in your own interest to do that. Start out, be respectful, and it's certainly going to go a long way in communicating with folks if you're respectful and ask for their time in a respectful way. In the past, and I mentioned it before, I've actually had to go and file a lawsuit. That's the point where you become not respectful, but it had to be done. And then you'll want to gather your medical documentation or figure out what you think needs to be shared and communicate with your doctor's office and let them know. So notification is the first step. The next steps are after you've had that engagement, after someone's gone through and made a decision, and you might go through a negotiation where somebody says, hey, we can do this, but could we help you out by doing this? Maybe they'll offer a suggestion that's a middle ground solution for you. things will start to get implemented. And be sure, again, keep track of what's happening, because if your request is to work from home, you want to make sure that you are keeping track of the date that you're going to be allowed to cut over so that there aren't any issues. And documentation is king. I mean, documentation is king everywhere, but in this process, you want to make sure that you understand and that they understand when things are going to happen, when you're going to work from home, when you might be able to bring your service dog in, when the limits, what the limitations are, when you can use closer parking, those kinds of things. So be sure you keep really good documentation. And once things are implemented, you don't want to stop there. You want to say, be able to say how things are working for you, if they're working as you expected. And if not, go back and say, hey, like, you know what, this works part way, but we need to make adjustments. And know that in really formal processes, you may have to reopen your case if you have to make adjustments. So these are just weird things you have to think about when you're doing this in a workplace, because a lot of times you're working with very large organizations. So, okay. So, things you need to know when requesting workplace accommodations. So, these are things that I have had experience with, and I just want to call them out because I think that it's important to call out some of the things that may not be stated, may not be said. And I put up here my little quote. If your well-meaning doctor tells you that accommodation is the law, know that they probably haven't had to go after an accommodation. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but um, it's probably truly the case that they personally haven't had to go after an accommodation for their workplace, and they don't know that, yes, it's the law, but that there are some give and take situations here, and then if it does become a burden to the company, that it could be denied. So, there's some things to think about here. Organizations really can claim undue hardship if there is a financial burden that they cannot support. So, oh, okay. Actually, I see Molly says there's a raised hand option. Does anybody have their hand raised? Let me just look and see. I don't see any raised hands, but thank you, Molly. I Molly is like the best moderator ever. Okay, so Renee, okay, raised hand. So actually, Renee, if you want, do you want to type a question? And actually, you can enter a question in the Q&A too. If you want to throw something in there and we can answer it at the end, that would probably be the easiest way to handle it right now, because we're kind of one way on this. Let me just look and see. There we go. Okay, different as opposed to Luis. All right, I'm going to go back. Okay. All righty, good enough. I think we're okay, so I'll keep moving on. I just want to say a couple of things. Medical documentation, we talked about that earlier. It is usually needed for an accommodation request. And I say usually because sometimes there is a case where it's super apparent that you don't need to document something, and your boss might look at it and say, okay, yeah. And that might be a case where maybe you are on crutches. You've had a surgery, you need a temporary accommodation. It's super obvious to everybody that you're going to need an accommodation. And in most workplaces, your boss actually has the latitude to make a decision without medical documentation. So that is actually the case, especially when it's something that's like super obvious. So management has a lot more latitude than they will often say they do. And I discovered this to be the case as well. In my last case of asking for accommodation, I had read the policy extremely well, understood it, understood that the manager that I had could make the decision to go ahead and give me the couple days of working at home that I was requesting on his own. And it actually said right in the policy that they would be allowed to do that. Instead, he decided to defer it to HR. HR deferred it to the third party. It got into the loop where I had to kind of keep pushing and saying, hey, have you made a decision on this? Which is frustrating when, in my mind and from what I read on the policy, my manager could have just done it on his own. So, you just prepare yourself to encounter these kinds of frustrations. Prepare yourself to get in there and have to communicate with people and say, look, where's this process at? I've done my piece. I've gotten this piece of paperwork in. You've said it was going to take this long. How long is it going to take? But also know that, it may actually be at management discretion to make decisions. I've also had a case where a manager made the decision without asking anybody else. I came in and I said, look, I'm going to need some accommodations with respect to how I see things on a screen. I need a better monitor. I need something that doesn't flicker, that doesn't cause problems for me with the visual issues. And yes, all these sessions are recorded, Margaret, just letting you know. But in that kind of a situation, your manager may have the latitude, but go ahead and ask, find out what the policy is. It does make it easier if they're able to make a decision on their own and able to help out. I mean, I've had to request special software. My manager just said, tell me what you need and I'll sign off on it. So sometimes you get that person who is really accommodating that way and very helpful. And other times you're going to get in some kind of a loop and a bunch of red tape. Know that your situation is confidential and it should only be known by people who have to know about it. And I say this because it's always been kept confidential, except in the last instance where I went after the accommodation and literally had a manager ask me in a meeting if I would explain to people why I was not coming in on certain days. And I don't even know what to say about that. That was a real shock. But it was during a team meeting when the manager said, "Well, could you please explain to people why you won't be coming in?" Because I guess they didn't have that option. The weird part about it was is there was one other person in my group who also had some work from home days and had an accommodation. I don't know if he was ever put through that. But it felt like a distinct violation to me of the confidential nature of what we were talking about. So yeah, we do need an oh my god emoji for that. It just was not a great situation. So I've never been one to ever say anything, is completely confidential. There's some obvious things that people can look at me and see that I have like weird funky glasses that I sometimes use for reading a screen. Obviously, clearly I've got a problem. And I've had my screen sizes up to a point where, I can zoom in on things and see them better. I mean, and it's obvious if somebody walks by that, I'm having more of an issue than somebody else. My hearing aids are not secret. They're right there. Whenever I pull my hair back, everybody can see them. So, I'm sure that people know, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay right now with people knowing that I've had MS. I've had MS for 30 years. I'm a success story, and everybody encounters it in a different way. So, I've been one of the lucky ones. Some people want to be very private about it, and you should have every entitlement to be private about it. So, it is confidential information. You will find yourself educating people. Just know that that's going to happen. It might be your HR people. It might be those people on the other end of that third party line. I ended up having to explain to one of those third party intake people some of the terminologies that I was using, which kind of blew me away as well. Again, oh my God. But I've found that I've had to educate people on certain things. I've had to explain to them why an average monitor won't work for me, why I need something with better adjustments, why I need to get higher contrast. It's been interesting, but just know that you're going to have to go in and probably educate people about what you need and why you need it. And I put down at the bottom, and it said opening a court case does not guarantee that you will get what you need. And I say that because I've actually had to go that route. I had to go that route with a state agency. So we talked earlier about states. I put the money into it. I went through the process. I documented everything out. And in the end, I had an attorney that came back showing me a precedent that had been established with the state agency in the past month that basically created a precedent for all decisions moving forward. And it wasn't going to be favorable in my case. I was trying to get an accommodation so that I could make my medical visits, which was ridiculous that I had to go to that point. In the end, I decided not to spend any more money because I had put money in, and no, definitely thousands actually, to try to get my accommodation case looked at favorably. Um, and you have to decide for yourself whether or not that's going to be the right thing. Know that you always have the option of going to the EEOC and filing a complaint. Nobody can keep you from that. They can't retaliate against you for it. You can't be treated differently because of it. But I can tell you from experience that sometimes filing a lawsuit doesn't help either. So actually, and Tony asked, did I end up needing to tell my coworkers why I needed the accommodation? What I did tell them in the meeting was that I had a medical condition, then I was requesting work at home because of it. That's all I said. Um, I figured, at this point it was probably fair to them just because, all of a sudden I was working from home and they were not. And so, I understand that, but again, it felt like such a violation of my privacy at that exact point. What my manager should have done was said, "Hey, we're approving this." I mean, like this is my mindset from a manager because I've been a manager before. If someone asks you, it's up to you, or you can send them to me. I mean, he was the manager. I mean, he should have been the one taking care of this. It's always up to management to decide, how they're going to manage things within a department. And if I had been a manager and I had someone who was being treated differently, I probably would have approached that from a blanket standpoint to say, hey, we have a couple of folks who might have medical needs for different accommodations. It's not your place to ask them questions. Just know that that's the situation. That seems like it would have been a logical thing instead of being put on the spot in a team meeting. So, but live and learn. But I want to make sure that you guys know that these are real things that happen in the workplace. And it was really amazing to me because it was a very large, very well-known organization that did this to me. I've actually worked for a lot of large, well-known organizations, and some are better than others. But that's basically it. So I do have the link, and let me grab it and put it in here for you. I think I've still got it here. Let me see. Yep, there we go. Okay, so I set this so anybody can get to it. Like I said before, my disclosure is I am not an expert. I've had some weird experiences, and I certainly like to share those with others so that you can think ahead of what you might need to do or think about. And this is kind of basic advice. There's a lot of information on the links that I put in here. By the way, there was a link in here that specifically deals with particular, this one here, Job Accommodation Network called JAN. There's an A to Z of disability and accommodations. And I wanted you guys to actually have this link because if you have something that clinically has a name, you can probably find it in this list. And it will actually go through and talk about the condition and make some recommendations. So if you're a little unclear about what you might need to ask for, this is actually a really interesting site to take a look at. Let me go to the end here. Additionally, so I put the searchable online accommodation resource on here for you guys. This is at the end. Office of Disability Employment Policy. This is the Department of Labor's link. And then how to file an EEOC complaint. But as we've talked about as well, go and look and see what your state has as far as ADA or disability accommodations for workplaces, because there may be different laws in different states. So anyway, that wraps it up for me. But always happy to chat with folks, answer questions, and I know we all like to connect to each other on LinkedIn. I definitely love to meet people in this space, and if I can be of any sort of help, let me know. I think that about wraps it up. So questions? Let me take a look and see if we've got some up here. Q&A. Do you have any recommendations for when to ask for accommodations? So that's from Nancy. My personal opinion is if you think that you have a reason to ask for them, you should ask for them immediately. And sometimes, yeah, Luis, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just breathing.
Oh, okay. If you think that, even starting a new job, okay, like starting a new job, starting a new consultancy, especially in a job workplace scenario where you're a full-time employee or you're regular, and you don't have to be a full-time employee, by the way, to ask for accommodations. But if you are an employee, then if you need to start off your job by asking for accommodations, that's okay. I am one of those people, and I know people disagree on this. When I fill out an application and ask me, do you have a disability or have you had one? I always say yes. And the reason I say yes is because I figure I may need to come in and immediately say, you know what, like we're going to have to do something. Like there's this crazy giant bright window right next to me. I need to go somewhere else where I don't have that reflection that's causing issues for me. You never know what you're going to get when you get there. There might be, stairs in a place that, I would do better without stairs. I might need, who knows? But I don't think it's a bad idea to ask right off the bat and kind of level set, where you are in terms of your situation. And then also keep in mind, there may be different times in your life where you need to ask for an accommodation and other times you really don't need an accommodation. So, and that's okay to say, like, for this time, this period of time, I need to either work from home. I need to have different monitors. I need to have different heat situations. I mean, like, it's okay. Um, anyway, so I don't know if that answers, but I would say as soon as you think you need the accommodations, then you probably need to do something. Anybody else have other questions?
Let me ask you this, Toddy. So I know that there are some folks out there that might be afraid of saying that they're going to need accommodations because it might be an obstacle to getting the job.
Yeah. I understand that completely. I guess for me, I've always put it out there right away that I do consider myself to have a disability. And I don't know if that has caused me to not be selected. I would hope that's not the case.
Right.
I always hope that's really not the case in hiring. But what the thing is I have a 30-year record of being a highly valued employee and for what I do, for what I'm qualified to do. And I feel like these are things that we really need to be embracing within our culture, is that different abilities for people does not mean that they cannot do a bang up job. And because I mean, I've worked with so many people with different challenges that do phenomenal work. So I hope that we're enlightened enough in our societies these days to realize that it's okay that we hire someone with a disability and accommodate them, because you know what? They're still an incredibly valuable employee. And we hire people for a reason, right? We need the work done. So I don't know. I mean, I get it. There's all kinds of weird stuff that goes on in the workplace. I mean, more weird than most of us know. Um, I haven't had any kickback from that. I've never had anybody say anything bad to me about it. Well, what kind of accommodation? Nobody's ever asked me in an interview what kind of accommodations are you going to need, even though I've said very distinctly I may need accommodation. By clicking that box. Nobody's ever asked, and it hasn't seemed to be a problem. And I put this out there. I've never been unemployed, so I don't think it's hurt me. And I don't hide what I have. I mean, like, nothing's like super visible, but there are things that are definitely visible. The way I use the crazy big monitors and make giant things on screens, and the way I have things in contrast, because I'll have weird colors sometimes on my screen, different from what other people's software. My hearing aids I can't hide. I can't hide my chargers for my hearing aids on my desk either. So, yeah, it's I guess it's really a personal thing. It's however you feel.
Right.
But
Kimberly had added a comment in here in chat that says, I've had job offers retracted when I was honest up front. So I started just waiting until
ooh,
I show up on my
ooh,
first day and saying, I need
ooh,
to speak with someone about accommodations.
ooh, goodness, yeah. No, I'm really sorry to hear that. And that would be a case if that ever did happen to me. I would definitely file an EEOC complaint.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, again, it's like you don't want to be that person. Um, somebody has to hold these people accountable if they're doing that kind of thing. I mean, that is just plain wrong. I've worked in, like I said, some large organizations where, you see a number of people with different abilities everywhere. I worked with a guy that had the full out, I mean, essentially the implants, the cochlear implants. We had a deaf person on our team. The interesting thing for me was to learn from them, to really begin to understand in working with these folks what they actually needed and what I could do that helped everybody else in the room. And I would have
Mhm.
people come later to say, hey, thanks for, setting this up so that, this person could, see what was on the screen and see the closed caption and, get the transcripts and everything, because that really helps me because I'm hard of hearing, but I've never said anything. And I had a manager tell me one time when I helped her out with her group on an event. She said, I probably never said anything to anybody before, but I have a hearing issue, and you have no idea how much difference it's made. So, I'm hoping that we can bring something to the table. I mean, we've got
Sure.
a perspective that others don't have.
Mhm. All right. Quick response to Margaret, who was asking about links from chat getting saved with the session recordings. In AirMeet, you'll be able to get to the links, but when I output these in, I think they go out in MP4 format, like a video format. Um, the links won't be there. So you will be able to go back into AirMeet and grab the links. All right,
Yeah, and
let's
I'll send you the link to Louise for
great.
my deck. So, but all
Okay.
good. But yeah,
Oh,
everybody, thank you for attending. I appreciate it. So,
yeah. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm looking for more questions. I'm not seeing anything on there. And just real quick, Toddy, I think that it's the quality of your microphone, maybe that just needs some.
is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know because the other one wasn't working so well either. And
Hmm.
my mother, who's a little bit hard of hearing, tells me all the time she has a hard time hearing me, and I haven't had quite so much problem as after I got the hiatal hernia, and I have trouble like get yucky, phlegmy stuff in your throat. It's gross.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of a nerd, so you're like a techie nerd. So maybe you should get one of those, those Shure SM7Bs or something.
I probably should do that. Yeah, I am a complete tech nerd, so there's no question. So, and my apologies if any of you had trouble hearing. So, I mean, I'd be the first person to tell you that I know exactly what that's like. It's not fun.
Right.
So,
Right. No, but thank you, Toddy. Thank you so much for sharing this information. This is great. And again, everybody, this is all the sessions are recorded. This one will be available like a minute after we close out here, and then I'll be sending all the recordings to everybody probably about a week after the event wraps up. I have to format all of it. Okay, so and with that, we're ending day 2. Day 3 starts tomorrow. Let's see, the final day of July. Um, it's Nicole Latois auditing online courses for accessibility. That one was we actually had a discussion about that on the in our TLD Slack, TLDC Slack, and that one I'm really looking forward to. That's not one that you often see as a presentation, so please make sure you attend tomorrow for that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the session. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow.